Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I was just turning over some clean sheets there, so I'm ready to take notes when I'm speaking to Mandy Mayhem-Bullock. Good afternoon, Mandy. What's the best way to say it? A candidate for mayoralty in Dunedin. There you go. And for council as well, actually, eh?
Yes. Hi,
Very
Pat. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, good to be with you. And just so people know, you are incredibly lucky to live in a part of Dunedin that I would love to live in at some stage, which is a bit further north, and the internet at the moment is a bit less quality. So we're going to give this a real good crack. We're going to have a good chat about things, and we will leave space for each other. So the conversation, there might be a slight lag between question and answer, like very slight. Hopefully it won't be noticeable. And other than that, just so people know, there's on Mandy's end, the internet's a bit slower, and if anything should come from that, we will address it. It's live streamed. If it doesn't, we will have a normal conversation. So how are you, Mandy? How was your day? What's been going on?
Great. It's a little bit windy out here in Blueskin Bay. I've been posting flyers for myself and community board representatives in the letterboxes to go with the voting papers I hope are coming out in the next few days.
You are trying out for the mayoralty. You're trying out for the council. Pardon me for not knowing, but are you also trying out for the board as well? Are you like on 3 votes? Are you allowed to be on 3?
Yes, you can. And last time, that is exactly what I did. And my wonderful community board constituents said I was doing such a good job, they voted me back onto the board. So this time I'm signalling, please vote me mayor or city council.
What is the role of a board member? So the way I think about it is there's boards that are more localized, like all over the country. So more localized to like, I think they used to call them wards, to different wards, different parts of the region. And then there's the council who looks after the whole region. And then there's the mayor who kind of is in charge of or runs the council. First of all, is that a fair description of sort of the pyramid? And if it is, what do those guys at the bottom particularly do of the pyramid? Not the bottom of the importance there, Mandy, but the bottom of the pyramid, the guys in the wards. What do they do?
Well, that's the root, our grassroots knowledge. Local people know best what works for local areas. So originally, my community board would have been Silver Peaks County Council or Borough Council. So we cover quite a huge landmass from Pigeon Flat, Swampy Summit, all the way across the Silver Peaks to Flag Swamp and the Waitaki district boundary and back pretty much to the Port Chalmers, Normanby region. Huge landmass, but maybe only 4,000 inhabitants. Of course, campaigning for council, though, I'm going citywide. I would represent everybody in the area. You're sworn an oath to do just that.
Yeah, I was actually wondering, because you talked about local people, local knowledge. You're on officially, it's the Wakawaiti Coast Community Board. Is there any part of that which is a downside? Because you've been very locally focused. You know, when you become a council member or the mayor, of course, there's what, 3/4 of Dunedin. In fact, if it's only 4,000 people, there's 120,000 other Dunedinites that you haven't been necessarily looking out for. Is that hyper local knowledge going to be a downside at all?
No, not at all, because there are 5 uniquely different coastal communities, and I think my local knowledge could be applied to South Dunedin, Brighton, anyone who also is living coastally and low-lying. And if you think about that, that's a huge landmass. I just promote a lot of resilience for our communities. So I work closely with and fire and emergency too, actually. So my networks, I sit on a local advisory committee for fire and emergency, and our representatives come from the university, from neighbourhood support groups. I feel like I have good connections right across the city.
I think the biggest question that people want to know about you that I've heard is your surname, Mayhem-Bullock. Obviously, that's married, hyphenated name. But is Mayhem your original name? Like, is that your birth name, or have you adopted that through the years as somewhat of a pseudonym?
All of those things. No one's asked me about the name. No one's asked me about the name, actually. So, on my birth certificate, my name was Campion, but when I was a child, my mum changed name to Morrison, so I've always been MM. Wow. When I joined the circus, I had a pseudonym, Amanda Armani, for a while, and my friend Grubby the Clown said, if you want peace in your life, Armani's Italian for peace, he suggested I should embrace the mayhem. And with a friend called Donna Demente and another friend called Chaos, I thought, oh, Mandy Mayhem, that works for me. And then I changed it by deed poll, and my children have that name as well.
Wow.
Maximus Mayhem, my son, that's asking for trouble. Then I met my husband, just his name is simply Lee Bullock. And when we got married, my oldest, who's 19, said, wow, Mum, now your name is Crazy Cow. So what's in the name? People have unfortunate names, but I don't know. Mine's just kind of an expression of where I've come to at this point. I guess I didn't plan to be a politician, and I never thought what people would think of my name or how they'd react to it. But, you know, some people have unusual names.
I mean, from speaking to, I think you're episode 8, aren't you? Episode 8, so 7 other candidates running for mayor. For the people who are involved with council now, I think mayhem is something that I've already heard of within the council chambers. So maybe you'll just slip right in there and it'll be a duck to water, so to speak.
I'll be throwing my hat in the ring.
You mentioned your wedding, your marriage, I should say. I want to ask you about your wedding because from the ODT, I think this is 2016, wedding of the year. And I don't mean this word in a disrespectful way. I mean it kind of in an exciting way. This looks like utter mayhem, pardon the pun. Looks like madness. Tell us about your wedding, because this looks amazing. Looks like one of the most intriguing, interesting events I've seen for a very long time.
I'm very into events. That's my daughter, my oldest, Rose, and my little baby. We invited the whole community. It was like it was titled Marie Antoinette Goes to the Circus, and it was a king and a queen celebrating a harvest festival. So you can see people have brought me the kumara and the corn. Yep. It was very autumnal, so they've laid gifts at my feet. And the donkey, that represents Guernsey, where my husband's from. I had a large entourage. They were called Team Tiger Lily. It was a marriage in 2 parts. The first part, pure pantomime. Oh, we're doing a flash mob there. I think you're freaky, and I like you a lot. You know that? Yeah. It was very entertaining.
How do you integrate, I mean, like now thinking about being a councillor, being mayor, how do you integrate that part of your life, which is obviously huge? You're talking about circus performer, you're talking about pantomime, you're talking about, I mean, I'm pretty sure you talked about Gothic kind of, and looking how you're dressed now as well. How does that all get integrated into a chamber looking after the city, or does it have to be put to the side and you come in with, pardon the pun, but a different hat on to do council stuff?
I strongly believe in the power of the arts to promote civic well-being and strengthen communities and a sense of belonging. So all of the events that I do are very focused on bringing people together. I'm a marriage and funeral celebrant, so I'm used to commanding a presence and sort of being in deep with complete strangers, guiding them through life's journeys. So I'm not all flamboyant and frivolous, though. I work really hard in lots of governance roles, chairing community groups and working for local government with our executive committee. really look at policy, and what's brought me to politics is just genuine caring for community. So everything I do, I can only do the things that are important, because life is, well, it's a celebration, and I also just want to be that change, lead by example. Why not? Really seriously want to be in a governance role and affect real change for our communities.
I have kind of a series of 3 or 4 questions that I ask most people towards the end of the conversation. But as you were just talking about, like, what you want to achieve in the bigger picture, I'll ask you one of the bigger pictures now, specifically about being mayor. I mean, why do you think you would be the best option to be mayor for Dunedin? Which is, as you can hear, that would normally be a wrap-up question, but I'm asking you about the culture that you would bring. You're talking about how you would work with people. So why would you be the person that people should vote for?
I think the city needs good decision making. The role of the mayor is just one more voice at the table, and then you have some civic duties and ceremonies and ambassadorial things that you would be promoting Dunedin, beautiful Ōtepoti. And I really think it's important to focus on inclusive, accessible, vibrant, welcoming, sustainable place where everyone feels like they've got a voice at the table. I want to lead a collaborative council that really listens and engages, and I'm always going to advocate for the underdog. That's just my mode. I know what it is to be a beneficiary. I know what it is to live in an old, cold house and not be able to afford the cost of living at the moment. I think that I grew up in Brockville, state housing. My time travelling around the circus, I saw a lot of poverty. We'd go to places like Ngarawahia and Flaxmere, and I saw the state that we go, what's happening to our nation, homelessness. I really want to address well-being. In fact, one of my main platforms is that the council needs to focus on our social well-being strategy, environmental, economic, cultural and social well-being for all of our residents. And in light of the government reforms, centralisation, 3 waters, and also our resource management reforms, everything's going to be regionalised, or we're actually sadly moving away from local control. I think the way council operates is going to be very different, and one thing that we can focus on is well-being.
You just brought up 3 waters, so let's jump in. Tell me about your thoughts and views around 3 waters, where you sit on it, what you think should be happening. Do you support the centralising of our 3 waters? Do you like it as it is? The other model that seems to have been mentioned is sort of a smaller centralisation of Otago Southland coming together. Where are you on that whole thing? Where would you be as mayor? What are you trying to sell yourself as when it comes to 3 waters?
I think it's a much bigger and more contentious issue than we first thought, and I feel that councils are right to ask a lot of questions. How it's going to look, how it's going to be implemented. I think that there's going to be another bill comes out in October. It'll probably give us a better idea of what the costing is going to be, and I have a lot of questions. There's no argument about need for reforms. I think perhaps if they approach just potable water, addressing our drinking water first of all, but then I also understand stormwater and wastewater is a huge issue with the increased climate change events. It's even more urgent, and perhaps there's places that have never renewed their infrastructure at all, and they're polluting our rivers and our low-lying areas. So also co-governance, I think it's really important that we're engaging with mana whenua on all of these things. So I think, though, it's complicated. It's really complicated. And I think the general public understanding of how this is going to happen and what the needs of Dunedin versus Queenstown versus a rural area, those assets. Everyone's so different. It annoys me that because of population, we get one entity for the whole South Island, and I wonder if central government thinks that we sort of end at Christchurch and there's nothing beyond that. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me. I think local people should have a local say. And Dunedin, we have invested a lot in our infrastructure.
Yep. It sounds like what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that something needs to change, but you're not quite sure what yet, and you're not quite sure if this is the model. So something needs to change, but because I wonder if someone like yourself is a little bit at a disadvantage because you're not in the chambers now. The people who are in the chambers now are having these conversations every day. People like yourself and others who are going for mayor who aren't in those chambers aren't having those conversations. So maybe some of the things that you have a concern about, or that you're basically saying, I'm not really sure, is because we don't all have the information that some of those other guys do have. Would that be fair?
No, what I'm saying is we need high-level aspirational documents, statements of community outcomes, like what does Dunedin actually want? I'm saying that when this happens, when the reform happens, how are we going to input into what Dunedin gets to, what level of control we have over this asset?
Right.
I'm saying that it'll be
So
clearer.
you're more talking about if quote unquote head of it. You're talking about if quote unquote head office for the South Island region is in Christchurch. How does Dunedin get represented? How do we have a voice in there? How does head office quote unquote hear our concerns and what our needs are? That's where your questions are. Yeah.
Yes, like we'll have to all input into this very aspirational document and make sure it's like incredibly clear what Dunedin wants and how it's going to happen. And that's a strong advocacy role. And these things will be the very first things that the newly elected councillors will be addressing. The timing on all of this is it's rolling out in February. Also the other reforms, local government, resource management. It's a lot to take on and a lot of change all at once.
When you talk about what Dunedin wants, I jotted that down as you were saying it. When you say that, can you expand on that? Are you saying what the people want? Are you saying what the city needs? How do we find out, quote unquote, what Dunedin wants?
I think there's a wide range of ideas about what the right model is, and I think we do have to go back to the public and speak to them. I also private water sources too. If you think about old hospital grounds around here, Orokonui, Seacliff, Cherry Farm, they all have their own water supplies and systems. So the people that purchased into those properties, they purchased into that water. So if they have to upgrade the water to a certain level and then pay again for that level of service to be at that level, how many times will they be paying for their water supply? I think we were looking at the numbers for private water and it's hundreds of thousands across the nation. So the complication again is, my understanding is, people will be given a time to come up to speed with that drinking standard, but it's going to be expensive. So I'm very interested to see what all the costings is going to be.
Do you think you've got a different aspect or a different perspective on it as well because of where you particularly live and where your board is? Because my understanding from speaking to some councillors who aren't running for mayor, so I spoke to people inside the council who aren't running for mayor, so I could get more of an understanding of where we're at with three waters, so in other words, the reason I wanted to get the info from people who weren't running for mayor was because I wanted to have a sort of unbiased view on it. And I spoke to a range of people, and it seems that the summary from most is that our sewage is pretty good, our drinking water is pretty good, our stormwater needs work, other than kind of up by Blueskin Bay and further up there, because that's an area that more investment needs to be put in for that infrastructure. It's not quite to the same level as perhaps the rest of Dunedin. So do you think you see things up there, and is your perspective on it from up there might be different from the rest based on your personal investment in that area?
I'm on town supply. I've got mains water to the gate. We don't have reticulated sewerage, but my understanding is anyone who builds out here the holding tank, I don't think we have a wastewater issue. Stormwater, well, I don't think anything I'm saying is regionalised by where I live. No.
Look, pardon me if it came across that way. I wasn't saying it as a criticism that you're not informed, but it seems that most people that I've spoken to about the whole picture are saying the one place that those three things aren't to the same level, whether it's the sewerage we're talking about, is up there, and there is plans. Like I've been talked to about by people who were here and in the council in the 90s about how sewage and water got fixed on the peninsula in the 90s and joined in all of it into the city water, and saying that there's some aspects of Blueskin Bay and North that still needs to happen. So yeah, that was more the wondering about it, because then also comes down to this philosophical conversation of Three Waters being, and the example we use down here is Clutha, needing a lot of work done to theirs and having a very large expense for Clutha region. We're not Clutha. Should we end up being contributing towards Clutha? Philosophically, that to me at least is the same argument as should Mosgiel be contributing towards the peninsula, or should St Clair be ratepayers in St Clair be contributing towards Blueskin Bay. So to me there seems to be a bit of a philosophical conversation as well about paying for other people's things, whether it's within the city or outside the city. And I see a parallel that if we're happy to pay for other people's infrastructures that we're not going to use because they're inside the boundaries, that's not very different philosophically from paying for someone's infrastructure outside that region that we're not going to use either. So I'm always interested to see how people fall and why they either do or don't support Three Waters as well.
It's not about the money for me. I think it's fine that, we're all one body, Te Wai Panamu. But yeah, perhaps you're right about Clutha. I know Gore hasn't renewed their infrastructure. So there'll be small places that are putting up their hand, really wanting this to happen. And I support it that it needs to happen. But Dunedin's being responsible and continuing their infrastructure renewals, regardless of what happens, just to know that those assets are being well maintained. And it was, I think, probably why we had no rates increases for so long, is because that infrastructure renewal had been neglected.
Yeah. Look, I think
important.
what I hear. Yeah, I think what I hear you saying as well is what a lot of people that I'm talking to are thinking. I don't actually have necessarily a huge position on Three Waters, or not personally, because I understand that we've got it pretty good in Dunedin, right? So that's good for those of us who are ratepayers in Dunedin. I also understand that there are some regions and some areas who are never going to be able to do what they need to do. Clutha can't afford $5,000 per person to get there. Things like that. It's never going to happen. So there's going to have to be some kind of centralized help there for them to get up to standard. So in other words, I guess saying it for the first time as I think out loud, we are going to be paying for Clutha one way or the other, because Clutha can't afford it. It's going to have to come from the central government, whether that's as a part of Three Waters officially, or just funding that the government gives Clutha to get up to date, and we never do Three Waters. It's still going to come from the consolidated fund on some way, because it's not possible for that many ratepayers to fix up that system. So it either goes to hell and turns into like a third world country with their Three Waters, or central government steps in, and I think that's probably what's going to happen. So yeah, I don't know, it's one of those things. I like the philosophy of helping people who are in need, and I like the philosophy of I don't have a problem with the philosophy of paying for someone's whatever it is asset that I'm not going to use, because maybe a bit like you, it's society in general is only as strong as its weakest link, and the bottom half of the South Island, Clutha, is a part of our society. If they're very weak, we would be better if they were better. We kind of come together hand in hand. But when it comes specifically to Three Waters, I'm like, gosh, devil's in the detail, as you're kind of saying. What does that mean moving forward? What does that mean in Dunedin when there was a problem with our pipes? We need to know more information about that. So that's why when I say there's a philosophical conversation, there's a philosophical side of it, which I'm okay with and I'm in for, but there's a practical side of it that we don't have the answers for yet. So I'm sort of on the fence going, we'll wait and see. Personally, not that there's anything to do with you, Mandy, because I'm not running for council, but just so people know, that's kind of where I'm floating around it.
I think water management is more and more important with climate change events. We really need to address things like waste and stormwater, because we're polluting waterways otherwise.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is about, especially if you think about Clutha and about Central Otago and those sorts of places, lots of people from Dunedin do see benefits from those areas, whether it's holidaying there or visiting there or doing business with there. So I can also see again, it's a philosophical conversation, but why those places being stronger will still benefit us in some way on some level. I mean, you wouldn't want your neighbor's house, if your neighbor's house burns down, yeah, it can still impact you in a negative way. So if your neighboring province blows apart in their three waters, there's still a flow on, isn't there, on some level?
Exactly.
Yeah. You were talking a bit before about the philosophical aspect that you bring to the council, how you operate, bringing people together, these words. I had a conversation with another candidate yesterday who basically said, now this is not a quote, I am actually going to go and get the quote because I'm going to write a blog piece on yesterday's conversation, who basically said teamwork in politics is a myth. And it came across as a bit of a idea that basically the person at the top pushes everything through and gets the rest of the team on board, and that's how you pass policy. How would you as mayor work with the team, the councillors around you, the people around you? Would you like to be able to have a more like collaborative kind of an event? Would you like to be the person sitting at the top saying, this is what's going on? How would it work for you, that whole teamwork making the dream work, as they say?
100% I'm into a collaborative council. Councillors are sworn an oath to represent all of the people. So I want to see better engagement and communication, not just with each other, but with the city at wide, making sure every time we're looking at a report or a bill that we're really focused on the best outcomes for the needs of all of our residents.
Would it be fair to say that the way you would operate, really coming from the person that you are and the character that you bring to it, would be a unique and different way to run council?
I think there is chairperson of council, and really strongly it's the CEO that's in charge. The mayor is another vote at the table. So I think I would have to run things by the book. I mean, it's pretty standard the way a meeting operates, and how I'm not going to be making it theatrical or doing anything over the top. I'll just be running a meeting by the book.
So do you see the mayor as being more one of the team, obviously, who does set the agenda and who is sort of running the meeting, so to speak, but do you see the mayor on more of an equal footing to the other councillors with a few more responsibilities, as opposed to like the boss of the other councillors?
I think the boss is the CEO and the mayor is another councillor. I think the mayor's special power is perhaps to pick who the deputy mayor is and to and nominate who's going to be governing which committee, who's going to chair transport, who's going to chair arts and culture, the heritage group, etc., like that. So they get some special powers to delegate roles, but the rest of the time, totally a team player.
You ran for mayor last time round as well, and got a 1.68% result. What do you think either has happened or needs to happen for you to run this time around, and without any disrespect intended, but need to be a kind of serious contender? Does anything need to have changed, or do people just need to get to know you better? How do you change that 1.68% into 22%?
I think I need a truckload of money, to be honest, Pat.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Sadly, if I had 55,000 K to spend on my campaign, and some business people might just spend all of that money. I mean, last time round somebody did. I think I spent 2,000 on my campaign, which basically covered the corporate signs. They're about $50 each. This time I spent $2,000 on a bus ad, one ad. I've spent substantially more money than last time, and I think I needed to up my profile. I think probably the first time you run as well, you're a complete outsider, an unknown factor. People look at me and think I look unusual, I dress unusual, and I've got a crazy name, and maybe I'm a joke. But this time they might realise I say sensible stuff, I'm genuine, I'm not going to pretend to be somebody I'm not, but the person that I am, maybe I am a representative of one group, and we need a diverse voice around the table. I'd like to see younger people, I'd like to see more colourful people, and a really good ethnic representation of all of our amazing cultures that make up the city at the table. And if we can't get that, then we need to choose people that are at least going to advocate for everyone.
Yeah. Do you have an aspiration this time around of being mayor, or do you have an aspiration of using the idea of running for mayor to help you go up one level from where you are now to council? Or are you happy to stay in your local board level? Like, what is the end game for you? Like, what would be at the end of an election, like you've hit target X and that's really what you want to be?
I want to be the mayor.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And what?
I'd be happy to get on council.
Yep.
Yes. If I can get on council this time, I think next time people will take me a little bit serious. And if they can see what I can do, and if I can get that, well, I think every time you run, I think the first time you campaign is the hardest. I don't think I knew what I was doing the first time I ran either. And it takes, I think it's something you have to keep going at. Also, we've had one woman mayor in the history of mayors. What are we up to? Number 58? And
Suki
so
Turner?
far there's been Suki Turner to represent an entire gender. How about, one of my idols would be Georgina Bayer. How about a trans mayor for Dunedin? I think we're very conservative voters, but gosh, things have to change.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there's only been one female mayor?
I don't know. Maybe they just haven't had the caliber of a person yet. I think Sophie Barker would be an incredible mayor. I think Sophie's had a really good term on council. I think Sophie probably has a better chance than me of as an incumbent councillor. I think if I became a councillor, I'd be able to take a better shot at the throne. And I just hope that we get fairer and fairer representation every round. I'd like to see a balance on council of female representatives. And I do know that the operations team is pretty well balanced. I just think our city should express and represent everybody, diversity.
I'm just looking through the nominees as I'm speaking to you and what the mix of people. So council for mayoralty, there's yourself there, Pamela 2, Sophie 3. I think that's it. So 3 out of 11. Council, I'm not going to count that because there's too many councillors, but councillor said seems to be a lot more representation, or at least people attempting to be on council who are female. When you say you'd like to see an even, like you'd like to see better representation, would you be someone who would advocate for like quotas of various people groups? Like there should be a certain amount of iwi, there should be a certain amount of female, there should be a certain amount of, I don't know, LGBT community. Are you someone who likes to advocate for, you know, quotas being filled in that way, or do you prefer to leave it to the public to decide and then that's the way forward?
I think we get the people who stand, but I'm always going to vote other. So I'll be voting for youth. I'll be voting for ethnicity and diversity. So if there are any candidates that represent those other groups, then they'll be getting my vote just because I want a diverse voice at the table.
Does that also therefore mean, and I'm assuming when you fill out your voting form, there's a 1 beside your name for you, but does that mean Sophie gets the 2 for on your STV voting card for mayoralty?
Probably, because if I'm not popular there and I fall off the bottom and my number 2 gets counted, then I'm going to boost a comrade to the top, aren't I?
Have you guys talked at all? Like, you've said it like when you say comrade, I think there's a connection there, and obviously there's a connection based around sex. But have you guys actually communicated? Have you ever spoken to Sophie? Do you guys know each other? Do you wish each other well, sort of thing, in the race?
Oh yeah, definitely. I haven't told her she's my number 2 though. I just openly announced that.
There you go. That's called an exclusive. Hey, Rochelle's watching us at the moment, and she's got a question. She'd like to know: Have you ever previously been a member of a political party? I guess it's are you now is what I'd add in there, or have you previously been a member of a political party?
I used to be a member of the Greens, but I think my subscription has lapsed.
Nice. But that would be fair to say that's where you sit politically then?
Probably red-green, but left.
Yeah.
I don't believe in party politics at local level though, because I think, again, I've mentioned that when you're on council, you're advocating for everybody. So I wouldn't be policy flavouring in my decision making based on party politics.
So how do you feel about the incumbent mayor being actively a Green Party member and a Green Party candidate? Do you have any concerns around that? Does that not gel with you?
I think Dunedin is a green city, and I'm proud of that. And I think it's probably a great signal to the nation that we have a green mayor.
So when you say you're not into like national politics locally, you just mean driving policy? Is that what you mean, as opposed to belonging to the party?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Hey, let's have a look at another one of the kind of big issues for people who are voting: the George Street pedestrian zone, the pedestrianisation of a section of George Street. Where do you sit on that, Mandy?
I think it's good, isn't it? I think we had to renew that infrastructure, so it makes a good sense to upgrade everything at the same time. If you're going to go below, you may as well resurface what's on top. People seem to think that it's a big vanity spend because and an inconvenience. It would have been great if this all happened during COVID and we were in lockdown, and then we just came back and the city was all vibrant and new. But it didn't quite pan out like that. Never mind. I'm part of the Keep Dunedin Beautiful, and we looked at the plans and we looked at the urban design very closely, and I'm always looking at accessibility. And so my questions were, well, is there a railing? How low is that seat? How are we going to get back up from there? Is there enough shelter? Is it vibrant? Where is the colour? Is that a little bit monotone? And my understanding was some of that is for visual, like the grayscale helps people with visual impairments.
Right.
And I love some of Simon Kahn's design work that has a beautiful Māori Pacifica motif. I sometimes think that our city's a little bit too much Edinburgh flavoured, so it's good to incorporate that sort of representing our ancestry in the design. And as long as there's enough mobility parks and room for service vehicles, I really think that it might encourage people to come into the city. One of the things I do every week in the Octagon is I put on lunchtime music on a Friday afternoon, because in the meantime, I want to hold that space, the heart, the core of the city, the Octagon. I'm hoping that the upgrade is going to extend into there and renew some of the tiles and surface work, because the lower Octagon is our flush, level, accessible space at the moment. But if you look at the designs here, it's multimodal. There's a lot less curvature. So people, if you're pushing around town, pushing a wheelchair, pushing yourself, pushing a pram, or using a mobility aid, I think you're going to have a lot less camber to, you know, when I say camber, when you're crossing a big main road in a wheelchair, the road dips in and out of the curbing. I think this will encourage people into the centre because it'll be easier. Can you see how flush that looks? Flush level surface?
Yeah, so you're talking about, and people who are watching, you can see my mouse on the screen here, like going from one side to the other, it's like there's no curb, basically. I mean, that does make me question as well. I mean, I'm sure, not questioning like it's not going to work, but how does the water get away? I mean, if there's no curb and there's no obvious, as you say, camber, what happens to all the surface water?
Sure that the city planners have got that sus, Pat. There'll be one of those lines will be a grate. Maybe it's that part there.
That one
Is
there.
that just all an open grate system for it to flow away? I think that is.
Can't tell. I mean, these are just pictures that are kind of a representation, aren't it? I mean, the one thing, and this doesn't go to the octagon at the moment, does it? The plan that they're putting out for doesn't reach the octagon. It's more outside the Meridian Mall, as we see there, that sort of area. It does seem a bit strange to me that they didn't incorporate the octagon. That seems to be already the place where people congregate to, you know, to coffee or to bar or to hang out or to sit on the grass. So that seems a bit weird that they didn't maybe start at the octagon and start moving back down George Street. And the one thing that people don't seem to have been able to answer yet is, because there's a lot of complaints by some people about the traffic and about the parking going away. But as you can see in these photos, I mean, there is parking still there. Like there's cars parked on the side there. They are still there. So I'm assuming if you want to go to, I don't know what store that says JB High Five. If you want to duck in, there's still going to be a 5-minute park there or something for some people. But what people haven't been able to tell me yet is how many parks are we losing and how many parks are still there. I think for some people that would be information that would be useful. And I know that the pedestrianisation is to move away from that mindset, but it is still a mindset that people want to know about. So that's still something that I'd like to have as a part of this conversation, understand right here, there's a car park, how many of them there are and what they are. And because no matter how much we push for, you know, pedestrianisation or cycling or whatever, cars, especially in Dunedin, especially on a, 2-degree morning or whatever, are still going to be a huge part of the community down here forever. That's never going to go away. So it's still it still needs to be a part of the conversation.
I live rurally. I use my car. I like to be able to pop in and out of places. So my understanding is that they are 5-minute and 15-minute parks. And what it'll mean is there's a higher turnover of people popping in and out. So the parks will become available again at a more rapidly. And if you look along the street, some of it is bus stops and taxi stands and not this design, but actually at the moment, there are a lot of areas where it's just yellow lines anyways. We're not losing that in parks.
So what happens out of interest?
By making it single lane.
Out of interest, what happens to the bus stops that are currently in the space now? What happens to those? Do you know? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Well, I think we're channeling everything through the hub, aren't we?
So it comes off George Street down through Great King Street to the hub.
But maybe we'll run some, I think there'll be some short loops, like a shopper's bus that does a free loop, backwards and forth. Maybe that'll be the electric bus or a smaller one. I think we're getting an electric bus really soon.
Tell me about that from a mayoralty candidate. Public transport in Dunedin. You've just started talking about in a loop bus, electric bus. What would you be advocating for? What would you be wanting to see Dunedin become when it comes to public transport? And just before you answer that, we have had conversations on some of these episodes about things like trains and buses to Mosgiel as well as a part of that conversation. Where are you on that?
Well, I guess we're going into transport now. So I support multimodal. We need a city that's accessible for cyclists, for pedestrians, for people with limited mobility. And so we need to retain that parking, that mobility parking. we need better buses. I think at the moment that the argument is it regional council versus DCC? Should DCC take the buses over? I think what we could do is ensure, and this is the DCC, that there's better bus shelters and seats in all the buses, and maybe more bus stops. Because I think when the bus hub upgrade happened, a lot of stops were taken away, and it's such a big connector for our senior community, for them to be able to jump on and off a bus, but they can't walk for blocks and blocks, even that inconvenience of going to the hub. So that means they're not coming into the centre of town now. They're just going in and out of the hub and riding one bus to get to another bus to get close to the place where they want to go. So they're spending a lot of time. And I know this because I've got quite a lot of senior friends in the city that they tell me the gold card doesn't kick in till certain times in the day. So they can't really, they're still paying, and it's not that convenient. Sometimes it's easier to ride a taxi, and that can't be very environmental. I think if we had a better public service network and just a shopper's bus, or the one that ran from the university into town and back again, and it came by on a regular basis, people could just jump on and off. Then we wouldn't need all those main street parks, would we?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was living in Auckland and when I was a student in Auckland, there was a bus that went sort of down K Road, went past the university, came back, went down Queen Street, went round the back, went back up, I think, Newton Road or something. And it was you threw them, it's 20 years ago, but you threw them a buck and you got on and got off, and you got on and got off anywhere. And there was because it was quite a big loop, there was 5 or 6 of them going at all time. So you're kind of never more than sort of 5 to 10 minutes away from a bus coming past. So, if it is that 2 degrees day and you did decide to do that, thinking about standing at a well-sheltered bus stop for 5 minutes feels a lot easier than having to time it for a half-hour spacing when buses come around. So, so that's like, I now think about the mayor setting the agenda. If you were the mayor setting the agenda on public transport, those are the kinds of things you'd like to start seeing happening. Those are the things you'd start trying to push through, because as much as we say, it's a team in council, what you've been talking about, the mayor still does drive a lot of the initial, what we're going to be looking at as well. So is that where you'd go as mayor? That's what you'd be driving? Pardon the pun.
Well, I think park and ride from Mosgiel, a train in from Mosgiel would be amazing. And I also think that people are parking further and further out into the suburbs where there's free parking during the day. So they need that loop bus too, don't they? If they're going to leave their car somewhere, travel in the car, park it, and then jump on a bus that'll take them downtown to where work is. We need to streamline all of our transport modes. So with the hospital build, who knows how long that's going to take and what kind of congestion we're going to have.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because it does also lead into the next part, I guess, of the conversation. Flows naturally as the one way is becoming two ways. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out exactly why this is proposed. Maybe you can tell me if you've got a perspective on that. But it does seem on some level to be surrounding what's going to be happening with the hospital and what's currently happening outside the university. So do you have any position, or do you have any thoughts around the proposal of the current one-way system becoming two-way systems?
Well, the key there is it's a proposal, and it's Waka Kotahi who are in charge of the state highway. I think they're just putting feeler out for how it's going to work around the hospital. I don't want trucks turning and looping around, and I like that the one-way systems are double lanes, and that heavy vehicles can transfer across town. I imagine it's going to be very high impact if we have to move truck and trailer units in some kind of pattern around the city as well. I think the one way, if it's not broken, why change it? Yeah,
so that's pretty clear. No to the turning the one ways into two ways from your perspective as mayor. But you're right about Waka Kotahi, but some of the pushback that I've been getting from these conversations is I will check this with Mayor Hawkins next weekend, because I've got him on, But some are saying there are those in the council at the moment who have a majority who are actively pushing the changing it to two ways, away from the one way. The conversation they're wanting to continue on is let's continue the conversation around turning it into a two-way system. Now, I will check that in next week with the people who are sort of being accused of being in charge of that conversation. What would happen if you got into a council? Let's say you're on council, and let's say there's still a drive by some to want to turn it into a two-way. How would you address that? What would you do to then sort of ideally want to drive it back towards, if it's not broken, don't fix it?
Public consultation. It's really what does the public want, and I think I'd have to look a lot closer at how exactly a two-way system's going to work. As I mentioned, it's those heavy vehicles travelling across town. I want them to just be able to move directly, minimum impact.
And are you
Plus
saying
congestion in general?
You're saying the minimum impact is the current system, coming down from Blueskin Bay, staying on the state highway, going through the one ways, and then straight back onto the southern motorway heading south. Do you think that's the least impact at the moment?
I think so, and I think also when I say impact, I mean road surface maintenance. So if we start taking all those heavy vehicles through some other kind of bypass across the city, we're going to have to look at how, well, I guess it's Waka-Kotahi, but how this is going to be impacted and how that'll withstand just that heavy vehicle use.
Seems to me that the only logical conclusion here, and I don't think anyone's proposed this, is you'd either need an elevated expressway, like going over things, or the system that we have right now seems to be the best. Like if Waka-Kotahi went, well, let's have an elevated expressway sort of from the end of Northeast Valley past the university, all the way down past, Dowling Street back onto basically where the Cenotaph is. That would be a way of doing it, but I'm assuming that would be a $10 billion project as opposed to just leaving it alone at the moment, which seems to be working. Yeah, I don't see a reason for changing it to a two-way. But yeah, if you're the idea about pushing them out through Logan Park and coming back on again seems a bit ludicrous as well, which is the other plan for heavy vehicles. Elevated expressway, Waka-Kotahi, or leave it alone. That's what I think is the answer. Anything else you want to add to that before I just jump into something else?
Oh, what about an elevated expressway that just goes from the motorway across the top of Wakaru and straight over towards Mosgiel? But that's bypassing everything then.
Yeah, but I mean, because I spent the first 40 years of my life sort of in the top half of the North Island, that's a lot of the examples. And there's a place just north of Auckland called Orewa. It's probably Auckland's northernmost suburb at the moment, really. And when you drive to Northland, you'd used to come off the motorway, down through Orewa, and then keep on going. And they tunneled through a freaking mountain to enable the motorway to extend and go along the top of the ridge and keeping on going. And so, I mean, to be honest, actually, Mandy, that's probably the best outcome is there a way to take the motorway to bypass Dunedin with the State Highway 1? That's probably actually the only solution. But, with how I'm just thinking, I'm looking like with my eyes as I'm thinking about where it would have to go. I don't know if it's even possible, but I guess if they can bore through the middle of a mountain, they can do anything, can't they? But that would seem to be, if we could wave the magic wand and money was no option, a bypass would seem to make the most sense to me. That only traffic needing to come to Dunedin comes into Dunedin and everything else bypasses. Although in saying that, how would that affect Dunedin's economy? Because I'm sure, people coming from Oamaru to Invercargill at the moment, stop in Dunedin for lunch, or, they have to do something, they get gas here, that sort of thing. A complete bypass would have an impact. How much would that impact be? I don't know. But yeah, that seems to make the most sense if something was going to happen and money was no object. Right. As mayor, what can you do personally? What would you do personally to help residents with the current cost of living increases, if anything?
It's a tough one, isn't it? So back to Three Waters again. I'm hoping there's not going to be a water bill attached to basic living costs that landlords are going to push on to students and whatnot. So that'll have to be well thought about too, and the questions around how the water entity assets managed. I think probably we have to address rentals, and I've suggested an empty houses tax. Imagine that. So to disincentivize people just sort of property banking and then letting buildings get into disrepair, I'd like to see much better landlord management for our student quarter, where rent is just so exorbitant for really basic, well, a room in a flat, usually an old cold flat. So are we back to needing warrant of fitnesses for flats and some kind of rent cap? But the way Dunedin is growing and property prices have just boomed, haven't they? So I don't know what the solution is. We have to offer more social housing, more capped rentals, more income assessed housing, with the way the new housing plan is for the council that they've just implemented. I think the focus on housing is very important. And let me just bring up some of the points that they've outlined.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I've just got the housing plan here. So universal design and accessibility. Decent housing is a human right. So working in partnership with Mana Whenua, and the councils have employed someone from Kaianga Ora for the next 2 years to actually address what are the housing issues for Dunedin. I think that's important. So sustainable solutions too. And our houses have to be healthy for the well-being of everybody. So how we address cold and damp housing too. Most of, I think 1 in 5 pieces of housing stock in Dunedin is 100 years old, 1920s. And that's
Really?
me. I live in a 1920s bungalow. Yeah. 1 in 5.
Can we, you've given a few examples there, and mostly because of the internet connection, I'm like, well, let's get to the end of your list and then let's start have a chat about them. Because when I asked about what could you do to help residents with the cost of living, we've gone to housing, which is a great thing to talk about. As the mayor, how would you implement any of these things? Like, for example, landlord management, what would you do and how would you do that to not then pass the costs on to the tenants? Also, as mayor, could you say to a private landowner, you are not allowed to charge any more than X for that property? How would those philosophies play and be activated in a real world experience kind of way to help the tenants or help keep cost of living down for those people?
Good question. I think we'd need to incentivize things for landlords, and I'm not sure how. And maybe this is a government, central government policy level that we need to look at housing as well. I know that Dunedin has a much larger portfolio than most councils, and we've just allocated $20 million for from nothing to what's going to be spent on housing. So we're having a massive boom, plus all of the accommodation required for the hospital build. So, 50 or more houses have to happen immediately. I wonder if we can get someone to prefabricate them. And I think this has been suggested that there's a course at the Milton prison, and they could be making small homes, and the council could buy them and be relocating. I think changes to the 2GP mean that you're allowed higher density housing on smaller sections, so whānau housing. And I think this is a pattern that we're going to see, and we're seeing already. Instead of people being homeless and living in their cars, that it's quite likely teenagers aren't going to leave home. They're going to stay living at home, and grandma too. And we might have to look at little studio homes that are all higher density sharing. So back to our infrastructure. Will we have the water and facilities to each section to sustain that higher density?
Well, that's why I guess the whole infrastructure, looking at the three waters, needs to be looking at the infrastructure we're projected to need till like 2150, doesn't it? That's actually what we need to be doing, because it's pointless fixing the issues we have right now for only them to be issues again in 10 or 15 years from now. So what I hear you saying is there's a philosophical look on what we need to do with housing, but the actual real world application of that is more difficult. You talked about we need warrant of fitnesses for homes. Well, we have that now for rentals. It's called the healthy homes situation. So that is something that's in. Are you suggesting we need something above and beyond the healthy homes legislation?
Well, I think we need to empower renters to know what their rights are. And even though we have this legislation, I don't know that there's a lot of accountability. I think some landlords are still always going to be slumlords and not meet those insulation standards and whatnot. Maybe students need an induction into how to keep their houses warmer with things like draft stops and heavy duty curtains from the curtain bank that goes sort of from the ceiling to the floor, so they know how they're going to cope in winter is an electric blanket and one of those cheap ceramic heaters on the wall. I don't know.
But they don't sound like things that the mayor will be doing. So right back to the start of this conversation, it was like, as the mayor, what would you do to help with the cost of living? Not challenging any of your actual answers, because I agree with you. I mean, I've just been having a look at my home and trying to figure out, and I learned something about long curtains and pelmets that I never ever knew about, helping to keep the room warm. That if you don't have a pelmet over your curtains, the hot air at the top of the thing comes down the back of the curtains and goes out. And if you don't have curtains to the floor, the cold air comes in the window and comes under the curtain. I actually never knew that until about 2 weeks ago. So I actually get everything you're saying. But again, as the mayor, I don't know if you want to be going around doing workshops on pelmets and long curtains. So if you were sitting in that chair,
not me.
So that means what you're pushing policy to have this kind of stuff done more in the community. Is that what you're doing?
Yes, not me directly, but perhaps some place-based funding for social networks like South Dunedin, a wonderful asset, the Valley Project, and that they could run clinics and workshops on ways to better heat your home. I know Skill Set in South Dunedin just did one of these the other day about how to get your power bill down and how to look at I guess if you can't afford double glazing, you're gonna have to get great curtains and pelmets. Dunedin's a cold place in winter, and we've got
and in summer
an opposite issue happening in the summertime where we don't have air conditioning. We haven't planned for what a hot summer might be like in some of our office buildings and things. You
mentioned an empty house tax. That's a brand new philosophy or a brand new policy idea. So as mayor, tell me what it is. What's the empty house tax, and how would you, what is it all about?
I think a lot of people just purchase properties and sit on them, just land banking. I think the state of Princess Street and some of the buildings, shop frontages that have just been let go to neglect, or all the shops that are empty at the moment. If we had an empty building tax, then those retail outlets, I mean, they could be all kinds of community facilities. If the rent was lowered and the buildings were used, I don't know, it seems poor use of resources that
I get it, but again, thinking about the community today, we've just been through COVID. We've just had a lot of businesses struggle. It's probably more difficult for a tenant or a renting agent to fill those shops. And then you penalise the landlord again because he hasn't filled the shop, whilst his dream is to fill the shop, but he hasn't been able to do it. I don't know. How does that flow on? And I'm not trying to defend the landlords here and say, well, it's them, but if someone is actively trying to rent a space out but can't, why would they then? And I was also thinking, actually, as you were talking, the land banking idea, isn't rates kind of that? Because if you've got a property which you're not using or you're leaving empty, that means you're not using the resources or the assets for that building that your rates are paying for. So doesn't that kind of technically mean that the rates that you're paying, the full rates on that property, which include all the resources you're getting for that property that you're not using, is sort of you're paying for something because it's empty that you're not using on some level? If you're paying for the infrastructure, for the water and for the, for the roads and the buses and whatever else, and then you're not using them, that sort of is a bit of a quote unquote penalty for leaving a house empty as well, isn't it?
In a small way, yes, but I think the overall value of the property is going to be a drop in the ocean of
Right.
what the rates payments are. But not just talking about retail, but empty homes, places that are just listed as Airbnb or Book a Batch. Those could be rentals for people to live in.
Yeah. I guess it comes back. I guess it does come back to the obvious question of why should a council be allowed to tell a homeowner that they can no longer have an Airbnb, they have to have as a rental, or else they're going to suffer a penalty. And that's just a question I know a lot of people want to ask. It's like, the council saying now if you use your property this way, we're going to fine you, charge you. If you use it that way, we're going to reward you. I'm just wondering the role of the council in that and why that's okay.
I think it's more that we have a housing crisis on our hands. That's all, that we just need places for people to be living, dry, warm and safe. It's a human and a civic right, isn't it, to have a roof over your head. And if you wanted to go and stay at the night shelter, I think you're allowed to stay 6 nights and then you're not allowed to come back again for a month. So you could stay 1 night a week out of the month, or do all of your 6 nights and then find somewhere else to go. Well, where is that somewhere else?
Yeah. No, I'm hearing you. And what I'm hearing you saying is we need solutions. And I guess what I'm saying is, are the solutions that are being proposed right now the solutions? And I guess there's no answer to that question, really.
No, there isn't.
Let's ask a bit more about the council before we start to wrap up. I interviewed Sophie Barker a couple of weeks ago, and she said that this is, quote unquote, the most toxic workplace she's ever worked in, end quote. That's what she said. And so that's how she described the current council chamber, the DCC, and the people she's working with and around. How would you, as the mayor, create a culture that didn't get dominated by people, maybe one person, maybe 3 people, I don't know, but individuals bringing a toxic culture into that place that then causes some people to feel like the whole place is the most toxic place they've ever worked?
That sounds like mediation's required. But I think the thing with elected members is they're there to represent a diverse voice, and the council it's a debating chamber, isn't it? So I don't think you're going to get that mad team that always gels together, because there's going to be a person that goes against everybody's viewpoints, and teamwork. I think the council does work as a team, but that toxicity, what is it? I don't know. I'm not in that environment right now, but I certainly don't tolerate bullying. And I think there's a code of conduct, and I think there's some pretty clear standing orders that all of the council adopt. And if I was the mayor of the city, I would just be strongly reinforcing how councillors are to behave to each other in a respectful way and respect each other's opinions. And maybe they'll all have to go to boot camp mayhem, and we'll hold hands in a circle and talk about our feelings and respecting each other.
It's one of the possible, I mean, it sounds like a weird way to say it, but possibly one of the downsides of having elected officials is if you have an asshole who is a council member, it's very difficult to get rid of them if their assholedness, my word, is causing toxicity. Whereas if you have a workplace, it's very easy to go, you are bringing the company into disrepute. You are gone for the sake of the rest of the company. So when you talk about mediation and that, I'm kind of like, yeah. But, and I'm not saying but like it's going to happen, but then when that doesn't resolve and you've still got the asshole, hypothetical in this situation, obviously, what happens then? I mean, it's just it's a bizarre situation.
Yeah. I think if someone does something bad enough, they can be encouraged to fall on their own sword and step down, like behaviour that's not becoming of a councillor. And that would maybe be, I don't know, a court charge or something like that. Who knows? Drunken driving is one that springs to mind. But if those people... And I guess it's let the buyer beware. The voters out there need to be, maybe they need to come into some council meetings or watch some council meetings and sort of pick up on where the disrespect is. And I think if they realised, maybe they'd vote differently.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, all right. Hey, I've got a few questions to sort of wrap up with, open-ended questions for you to tell people what you're about and how you're going to do it. According to the ODT, a trio of retiring Dunedin City Councillors said the city has been progressing nicely. So some people who are heading off, they're saying, yep, we're doing all right. It's going along quite well. So my question is, why do you think you are a better option for the mayor than the incumbent specifically, when there are several people who are retiring saying, yeah, things are going pretty well at the moment?
Well, I think I'd run a collaborative council. I'd be really trying to get that voice of everybody, not just one opinion. And I do think the city's going good places, but I don't think that the residents are happy. And I think the answer is probably around communication or greater transparency or better understanding of how the council operates. Yeah, I think I'd be a mayor for all people, and I would really invite engagement and communication citywide, and I'd really be looking to raise public opinion around the council operations, the councillors and the team at the moment.
Does that imply then, when I ask you why you'd be better than the current incumbent, does that imply that that's currently not what's happening? There's a problem with communication? Is that what you believe?
I think our mayor is a great chairperson and has a wonderful understanding of policy, but I don't think the collaboration is there. I think there's some divisiveness. Yeah, they're not all on the same page. The teamwork thing is, maybe needs a little attention.
Do you think that divisiveness, in your opinion, comes from several sources, including the mayor, or do you think that there are some particular people driving it, and it's just like, is everyone contributing to the divisiveness, I guess is what I'm saying?
Oh, it's just a few people.
Because you've already said this, you're never going to get 14 people who are all going to, hold hands and want to go in the same direction. There's always going to be contrary ideas. So what's the difference between a contrary idea and a divisive council? Where does that line sit?
A contrary idea.
So, someone doesn't want the one ways to go two ways, someone does. You can have different ideas. Where's the line between your different policy ideas in council and it becoming divisiveness?
I think it comes down to personalities and perhaps power plays too. I think that the whole group work really well on the decision making, but it's the personal politics that is probably the problem.
So it's more about individuals' personalities within council as opposed to necessarily the broader council picture.
Yes.
You're being very diplomatic, by the way, Mandy, and keeping singular sayings there as
Oh,
well.
I'm uncomfortable. I can work with anybody. I just have to say, I'm a very good team player, and I get along with everyone. I'm glad.
3 questions that are kind of in the same vein. What are your priorities as mayor? I'll do these one by one, but I'll tell you what they all are. What are your priorities as mayor? If you could only achieve one thing as mayor, let's say you're the mayor and in your term, you've got a council that works against you for some reason, and you can only get one thing through, what would it be? And what would you achieve in the first 12 months? So why don't we start with what are your priorities? So you've got a list of things you want to achieve as mayor. What are the top few? What are the priorities?
Well, I mentioned right at the beginning of the interview that I really want to focus on our social wellbeing strategy. I think it's been neglected, and I think we really need to look at social, cultural, environmental, and economic well-being for all of our residents. So that's a very holistic approach to this collaborative council that I'm going to run. We'll be an awesome team, and lead by example by just role modeling with my charming personality. I want to be for all the people, so inclusive and accessible. I'll be really engaging with our Disabled People's Assembly, with our mana whenua and local iwi, with all of the disadvantaged and underrepresented people in our city, multi-ethnic society. I want to make sure that everyone feels like they have a voice and that they're being listened to. And I think that's my approach. I want a happy and healthy city. I want to see Dunedin thrive. I want it to be a place where all of our residents are happy and looked after. So basic civic rights and human rights to food, shelter, and a welcoming and belonging sense of ownership of the whole city. I want to share with everybody. This is our beautiful Ōtepoti.
What about, I know this is a bit of a silly hypothetical, but let's just say for some reason you could only get one policy change through, one thing, one achievement, a tangible, literal achievement. So I guess what I'm saying is that you've just given us kind of a broader picture of what you'd want to do, your priorities are. But if there was a tangible thing, like would it be the hydro slide at Moana Pool? Like what would be the one thing if you could only get one thing through? Can you think of something like what would be the like even if it's a vanity project, not for you, but for like your philosophy and your mayoralty, what's the one thing you'd like to leave your name on?
Oh, look, I'd be looking at arts and culture. I'd be making sure we're safeguarding and upgrading our facilities, ensuring that we've got some good sound policy around music management, save the music scene. Like I mentioned earlier, I believe in the arts and culture as a way to increase civic well-being and our sense of belonging. I'd be having incredible festivals and events, multicultural, embracing and showcasing all of our incredible talents, young people. Like I said, I put on music in the Octagon at lunchtimes. I want the whole city to be a vibrant place. The things I love about Wellington and Hamilton, I want Dunedin to be another Melbourne. And people say it's like that, but
Yep.
I think it's been vibrant before and it can be vibrant again. And it's about the people. So I'll be supporting the arts community. I'll be upgrading our theatres and facilities, the Mayfair. I'll be coming up with a solution to replace the Fortune Theatre. And I don't think it's a black box at the stadium, but I'll be engaging with the arts community to ask them what they want and what they need, and to be working on our live music policy to safeguard venues like the Crown and make sure that we have an increase in places for music to be rather than our venues closing down all the time.
Okay, and I want you to be quite specific here. I mean, like you hear this in national politics. Tell us about your first 100 days. What is something that you will end up achieving as mayor in the first 12 months? Like what's something that will be through the chamber, through the voting process, and will be enacted in the first 12 months?
It's got to be housing. It's the most urgent thing. So, yeah, I think it's prefabricated little modular studio houses, and we need to sort of build them inside, build them at the Polytech, build them at the prison, and activate some greenfield land use to house those people coming for the hospital build, but knowing that there'll be ongoing housing stock for the rest of our residents too. So yeah, there's that $20 million put aside for housing, but I know that it's only going to get more expensive to be doing building work. So we have to act now and act fast and really address the housing crisis. So that will be my first achievement.
All right, Mandy. Hey, well, good luck with the run up to the election, which is what, 3 weeks away now? Is that about right? 3 weeks away. But I think voting starts on Monday, doesn't it? All papers went out on Friday or something like that. So people can probably start to get into it now. I appreciate you giving us some time today. Mandy Mayhem-Bullock running for, I guess, local board and council and Mayor of Dunedin. Appreciate your time today. Thank you for your time and all the best for the run up to the election.
Thank you so much. Ka kite. See you next time. Take care.